Isabella stood by the grand marble staircase of the Blackwell estate, her hand gently resting on the curve of her belly. The soft fabric of her champagne-colored gown shimmered beneath the ballroom lights, her radiant smile masking the unease that had started brewing in her heart. The baby growing inside her was the light of her world, a dream she had longed for. And tonight, she was supposed to feel cherished, loved, and secure. But something was off. Dominic Blackwell, her husband of 2 years and one of the country's most feared billionaires, stood across the room, surrounded by investors and celebrities, flashing his signature tight-lipped smile. To everyone else, he was the perfect man, suave, composed, endlessly charismatic. To Isabella, he was a mystery wrapped in silk and steel. She had fallen for his brilliance, the way he made her feel like the only woman in the room. But lately, that attention had faded. His touches were colder. His eyes didn't linger like they used to. He finally walked over to her, placing a hand on the small of her back, as if on cue for the cameras that flashed nearby. "My stunning wife," he whispered, kissing her cheek. His lips were dry. His smile didn't reach his eyes. The moment felt staged, like everything else in their lives lately. "You okay?" Isabella asked gently, her voice lost amid the laughter and clinking glasses. "Of course," Dominic said. "In fact, I've been thinking. We need some time away. Just the two of us. Before the baby arrives. Somewhere quiet, natural. No phones, no press." She blinked in surprise. It sounded unlike him, the man who practically lived in his glass office tower and held business meetings during holidays. "Really?" He nodded. "We need to reconnect. You deserve peace." Something in his tone made her stomach twist. Not with fear, but confusion. Still, she wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe the Dominic she married was still in there, somewhere beneath the tailored suits and strategic lies. Later that night, after the last guest had left and the chandeliers dimmed, Dominic curled beside her in bed and spoke of a private retreat, deep in nature, somewhere remote and beautiful. Isabella smiled, pressing his hand to her stomach, feeling the tiny kick of life inside. She didn't see the way his jaw clenched or how he stared at the ceiling in silence long after she fell asleep, dreaming of love, while he plotted something else entirely. The morning sun filtered through the tinted windows of the private helicopter as it soared over a vast stretch of emerald wilderness. Isabella gazed out in awe, her hands folded protectively over her rounded belly. Below them, a seemingly endless sea of trees stretched in every direction, dense, untamed, and breathtaking. Dominic sat beside her, calm and unreadable, his attention fixed on the view. He barely said a word during the flight, but Isabella chalked it up to business stress. Still, she was hopeful. Maybe this trip really was his way of trying. When they landed in a clearing surrounded by towering trees and chirping birds, a local guide greeted them with minimal words and even less warmth. Dominic handed him a thick envelope. Cash, Isabella assumed. Within moments, the helicopter lifted off again, leaving them alone in the deep jungle. The retreat itself was little more than a rustic cabin with no electricity, no cell signal, and only the basics. Isabella forced a smile, trying to embrace the idea of disconnecting. There was beauty in the rawness of nature, and maybe, just maybe, this was what they needed, a clean slate. On their second day, Dominic suggested a walk deeper into the forest. "Just a short hike," he said, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Nothing too far." They followed a narrow path through thick foliage. Birds called out above them, and the air was thick with humidity. Isabella moved slowly, mindful of her steps and the baby she carried. She asked him about the future, nursery colors, baby names, but his answers were vague, distant. Then, without warning, Dominic stopped. "Wait here," he said. "I forgot the water bottle back at the cabin. I'll be right back." Before she could respond, he turned and disappeared through the trees. Isabella waited, leaning against a rock, wiping sweat from her forehead. Minutes passed. Then half an hour. Then an hour. The light began to shift as shadows crept across the forest floor. "Dominic!" she called out, her voice trembling. No answer. She started walking back the way they came, but everything looked the same. Trees, moss, endless green. Panic set in. She fumbled for her phone. No service. No GPS. Nothing. The forest was eerily silent now. As dusk settled in, the air turned cold and filled with unfamiliar sounds, rustling leaves, distant howls, the unsettling cry of something wild. Fear clawed at her throat. "Please," she whispered to no one. "Please don't do this." By nightfall, her legs ached and her belly felt tight with pressure. She curled against the base of a tree, her arms wrapped around her stomach, heart thudding violently in her chest. She listened to every snapping branch and fluttering wing, tears slipping down her dirt-streaked cheeks. Then came the sinking realization: Dominic wasn't coming back. He had left her. On purpose. The jungle did not welcome intruders, it devoured them. Isabella moved through the underbrush like a ghost, each step slower than the last, her limbs heavy with exhaustion. Her once elegant dress was torn and caked with mud, her skin scraped by branches and insect bites. Her lips were cracked, her stomach growling from days without proper food. Rain poured in relentless sheets, soaking her to the bone, but she barely noticed anymore. Her focus was singular: protect her baby. She had found some berries she hoped were safe and drank from a small stream, praying the water wouldn't make her sick. Still, every movement became harder. Her vision blurred. Her swollen belly grew heavier, each kick from within reminding her of the life she couldn't fail. But her body was breaking down. Her bare feet bled from the forest floor's thorns, and her back throbbed from sleeping on cold, hard ground. Each night, she fought off fear as unfamiliar eyes glinted in the shadows. "I won't die out here," she whispered fiercely, to herself, to her baby, to the universe. "I won't let him win." But her strength couldn't outpace nature forever. On the 6th day, Isabella collapsed. Her legs gave out near a moss-covered rock, and she fell face-first into the damp earth. She tried to crawl, but her arms refused to move. Her mind dimmed, and her final thoughts swirled between guilt, pain, and the soft weight of the child she would never hold. Then, voices. Soft, foreign, rhythmic. A woman knelt beside her, placing cool hands on her cheeks. Through blurred vision, Isabella saw deep brown eyes, filled with concern and command. A warm cloth wiped away the mud from her face. Someone pressed a bowl of warm liquid to her lips. The woman's name was Mira. She didn't speak much English, but her presence was strength itself. She carried Isabella on her back, step by step, into a hidden enclave deep in the forest, a small village woven from wood, vines, and purpose. There, women with stories etched into their eyes surrounded Isabella with care. Some had scars, others silence, but all moved with the grace of survivors. They fed her, clothed her, and sang to her belly. Days passed, then weeks. With every sunrise, Isabella's body healed. And when the time came, they helped her through the screaming storm of childbirth, holding her hands and whispering courage. When her baby finally cried, the sound echoed through the trees like a miracle. A boy. Tiny, perfect, and alive. She named him Leo, after the lion, because he was born of fire and strength. Cradling him in her arms, wrapped in hand-woven cloth, Isabella wept, not from pain or loss, but from fierce determination. She had survived. And now, for him, she would rise. The village became more than a refuge, it became Isabella's rebirth. Under the emerald canopy of the jungle, life took on a different rhythm. The trauma that once screamed inside her began to quiet. Days were filled with work, rituals, and healing. Nights were for stories, laughter, and the lullabies Mira sang under her breath as she tended to herbs by firelight. Leo grew strong among the trees, his first steps landing softly on dirt paths. His giggles echoed through the forest like a promise that pain would never define them. Mira took Isabella under her wing, not as a patient, but as a student. She taught her the delicate language of leaves and roots, the power of healing through the earth. Isabella learned how to make salves that soothed fever, teas that eased anxiety, and poultices that pulled poison from wounds. More than that, she learned silence, presence, and resilience. With every herbal remedy she crafted, she stitched together her broken identity. Over time, the other women of the tribe came to respect her. She helped in childbirth, treated infections, and even mediated small disputes. Though she didn't speak the tribal language fluently, her actions built trust. Mira often told her, "Pain made you fall, but love will make you rise." Isabella began keeping journals, writing down everything she learned, sketching every plant, recording every recipe. Her notes became more than survival instructions, they became the blueprint for something bigger. 3 years later, Mira handed her a woven satchel and walked her to the edge of the jungle. A guide from the nearest town had been arranged, and Isabella clutched Leo, now a curious toddler, against her as they stepped back into the world. The pain of goodbye was sharp, but her purpose burned brighter. She left Isabella Blackwell behind. In her passport and business paperwork, she became Isla Rivera, a woman forged by betrayal, reborn in dirt and leaves, and now ready to reclaim her voice. Settling in a coastal town in Costa Rica, she began modestly, selling teas and oils at local markets. But her knowledge was profound, and her story, when she cautiously told it, resonated deeply. Investors noticed. Articles followed. Then, celebrities and wellness gurus began praising her products. Within 4 years, TerraSol was born, a global wellness company rooted in ancestral healing, women's empowerment, and environmental respect. Its mission wasn't just to heal bodies, it was to awaken strength. Each label bore her message, "Healing is our birthright." She built schools for girls in remote areas, funded shelters for abandoned mothers, and sent quarterly donations back to the village that had saved her. TerraSol didn't just thrive, it started a movement. And though Isla never used his name, Dominic Blackwell would eventually hear whispers of a woman, once lost in the jungle, now leading an empire that threatened to crush his pharmaceutical throne. She had risen, not as a victim, but as a force. The glass skyscraper loomed over the city like a monolith of ambition, its polished steel reflecting a world that had never expected a woman like Isla Rivera to rise. Dressed in an elegant emerald suit that matched the branding of TerraSol, she stepped into the grand ballroom of the International Wellness and Biotech Summit. Cameras flashed. Industry leaders whispered her name with awe. She walked with grace, her presence commanding, her confidence undeniable. No one could guess the wilderness she had once crawled through, no one except her. Leo, now a bright, observant 8-year-old, had been left at home with his tutor. Isla had come alone, focused, prepared. This summit wasn't just about wellness or innovation, it was about territory. The pharmaceutical industry had begun to feel the pressure from TerraSol's explosive success, and tonight's panel would pit traditional medicine giants against the rising tide of natural healing. Then she saw the name on the event schedule, Dominic Blackwell, CEO, Blackwell Biotech. Her breath caught in her throat. It had been nearly a decade since she last saw his face. The man who had left her for dead in a jungle, the man whose cruelty had nearly ended 2 lives. And now, fate had pulled them back together, not as husband and wife, but as corporate enemies. He entered the room just minutes later. Tall, sharply dressed, and aged by time but still exuding that cold charisma. The once invincible Dominic now looked slightly weathered, his confidence tinged with bitterness. His empire had begun to crumble under TerraSol's rise, and he was here to reclaim relevance. When their eyes met across the hall, he hesitated. Something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition? No, not yet. She was too different now. Her name, her face, her posture, everything about her had transformed. Dominic approached her later during the cocktail hour, his tone polite, professional. "Ms. Rivera," he said with interest, "I've heard a lot about your company. Impressive work." Isla smiled coolly, extending her hand. "Likewise, Mr. Blackwell. I admire persistence in the face of evolution." He chuckled, unaware of the dagger in her words. "Perhaps we'll find common ground." She tilted her head, letting her voice lower just enough. "Perhaps. Or perhaps some things deserve to be replaced." She walked away, heart pounding, rage humming beneath her skin. He didn't recognize her. Not yet. But she wasn't here to run anymore. She was here to win. The war began quietly, an overlooked patent filing, a cancelled distribution contract, a sudden shift in stock values. But anyone paying attention knew something powerful was stirring beneath the surface. Terrasol and Blackwell Biotech had locked horns, and in the middle of it all stood two titans: Isla Rivera, the visionary wellness mogul with a story of survival, and Dominic Blackwell, the aging pharmaceutical king desperate to maintain control. Isla never mentioned Dominic's name publicly, but her interviews painted a haunting narrative. She spoke of being betrayed, left to die, of surviving the impossible and building something indestructible from her pain. Her words, poised and polished, ignited millions. Consumers abandoned synthetic pills for her plant-based healing kits. Former partners of Blackwell Biotech jumped ship and joined her green revolution, inspired by her mission of healing, empowerment, and transparency. Dominic watched as his empire began to fracture. His board grew restless. Investors questioned his leadership. Every media outlet compared him to Isla, her authenticity versus his cold legacy. Still, he didn't back down. He launched aggressive ad campaigns discrediting natural remedies. He accused Terrasol of pseudoscience. He challenged their sourcing and certifications. But Isla had built her brand on integrity. Her community rallied behind her. Former patients, employees, and even scientists who had once worked under Dominic came forward to support her. She offered scholarships, opened clinics, and gave lectures at universities. Each move wasn't just a business strategy, it was an act of war wrapped in compassion. Behind closed doors, Dominic seethed. He ordered investigations into her past, demanded legal reviews of her early licensing agreements, and even tried to replicate her herbal blends, unsuccessfully. No matter how hard he pushed, Isla seemed untouchable, as if protected by some invisible force. He studied her interviews obsessively, watched her walk red carpets, analyzed her hand gestures and expressions like a man chasing a ghost. Yet, with every public encounter, he found himself strangely drawn to her. There was something about her presence that felt familiar. Her eyes, especially. That fire behind them, where had he seen it before? Still, he couldn't connect the dots. To him, Isla Rivera was an enigma, one he couldn't control, couldn't outsmart, and couldn't ignore. At night, he would sit alone in his penthouse office, staring at photos of her online, trying to decode the woman who had dismantled his dominance without ever raising her voice. He hated her power. He hated her influence. And yet, deep inside, a part of him feared her. Because she wasn't just challenging his business, she was haunting his legacy. Every press release, every interview, every rise in Terrasol stock reminded him that someone out there knew exactly how to hurt him, and was doing it flawlessly. And he had no idea who she really was. The ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and designer gowns, the air thick with wealth and ambition. The annual Global Health Fundraiser was the most prestigious event of the year, and Isla Rivera was its guest of honor. She glided through the crowd with effortless poise, wearing a deep scarlet gown that hugged her frame like fire wrapped in elegance. Her presence commanded attention, whispers followed her like shadows. Across the room, Dominic Blackwell watched her with narrowed eyes. His tuxedo was sharp, but his demeanor frayed. Tonight wasn't about charity for him. It was about answers. The tension between them had become impossible to ignore. She was everywhere, on magazine covers, at boardrooms he used to dominate, in the ears of clients who once pledged loyalty to him. And every time she spoke, he felt like she was speaking to him. He waited until she stepped out to the balcony for a breath of fresh air. The city skyline glittered behind her, but she was alone. Perfect. Dominic followed, footsteps silent, voice low. "Ms. Rivera," he said. "I need to ask you something." Isla didn't turn immediately. She had known he would come. The moment felt inevitable. "I've looked into your past," he continued. "No records before 8 years ago. No family, no real origin. Who are you really?" She finally faced him, her expression unreadable. Their eyes locked. For a moment he saw it, something he hadn't let himself consider. "I know those eyes," he said slowly. She stepped closer, her voice icy calm. "You left me to die. Dominic froze. The words struck like a blade. His breath caught. His hands twitched. Isabella. Her lips curved, not into a smile, but a silent confirmation. That's right, she whispered. You abandoned your pregnant wife in a jungle and flew away like it meant nothing. But I didn't die, Dominic. I became unstoppable. Behind them, a group of journalists, lingering near the open doors, caught the last few words. Phones began to rise. Eyes widened. Murmurs swept through the crowd like wildfire. Dominic reached for her arm. Isabella, I didn't. Don't, she snapped, pulling back. You don't get to rewrite this. He looked around, suddenly aware of the shifting air, the watching crowd. Can we talk? No, she said firmly. You don't deserve quiet rooms or soft endings. She stepped forward, addressing not just him, but the entire world listening. For every woman abandoned, silenced, or erased by a man in power, know this, we don't stay broken. We don't stay buried. Some of us come back, and we come back with fire. The media erupted. Photos were taken. Headlines were born before the night ended. Dominic stood paralyzed, watching the woman he once discarded become the voice that would destroy him. And she didn't even look back. The storm that followed the fundraiser didn't just shake the room, it shattered the walls of Dominic Blackwell's empire. Within days, Isla's legal team filed a lawsuit against him, an explosive case accusing him of attempted murder, insurance fraud, and corporate malpractice. Headlines screamed across every news outlet. Wellness mogul sues billionaire husband who left her to die in jungle. The world, already enchanted by Isla Rivera's rise, now watched with breathless fascination as she transformed into a symbol of retribution. At the heart of her case was a mountain of evidence, meticulously collected over the years, piece by piece, in silence. Isla revealed records of Dominic's offshore accounts, shady transfers around the time of her disappearance, and most damning of all, an enormous life insurance policy taken out in her name just weeks before their jungle trip. The beneficiary? Dominic Blackwell. When she had disappeared, he filed a report with authorities claiming she had wandered off and likely succumbed to the elements. No rescue mission. No follow-up. And shortly after, the policy was quietly processed. But Isla hadn't just survived. She had documented everything. With Myra's permission, her legal team unveiled footage taken from the tribe's cameras, images of a dirt-covered, dehydrated pregnant woman being carried into the jungle village. Videos showed her healing process, learning survival skills, giving birth surrounded by women who had lost everything and found each other. The footage was raw, human, and undeniably powerful. Courtrooms filled to the brim with spectators and press. The world watched as Isla took the stand. With her head high and voice steady, she recounted everything: her marriage, the lies, the abandonment, the hunger, the childbirth in the jungle. She didn't cry. She didn't waver. She stared Dominic down with the calm fury of a woman who had nothing left to fear. The prosecution followed with internal memos from Blackwell Biotech, detailing Dominic's disregard for safety protocols, silencing of whistleblowers, and experiments rushed to market despite known side effects. Former employees stepped forward. Former patients followed. Dominic's defense team tried to spin the narrative, claiming Isabella had faked her death, that she had run away. But every lie unraveled under the weight of Isla's truth. There were receipts, flight records, satellite timestamps, witnesses. Public support for Dominic plummeted. Blackwell Biotech's stock nosedived. Corporate partners withdrew overnight. Protests erupted outside his headquarters, where people held signs reading, "She lived. He lied," and "Terrasol speaks for us all." Inside the courtroom, Dominic sat silent, his once arrogant expression hollowed by exposure. He wasn't feared anymore. He was pitied, despised, and finally, held accountable. Isla had turned his calculated act of betrayal into the very weapon that dismantled his dynasty. And the world didn't just watch. It cheered. The prison visiting room was bleak and cold, all gray walls and flickering fluorescent lights. The scent of bleach hung in the air, and metal chairs scraped across the floor with every movement. Dominic sat at the table in his orange uniform, shoulders slumped, a shadow of the man who once ruled boardrooms and silenced opposition with a glance. His hair had grayed, his hands trembled slightly. For the first time in his life, he looked small. Then the door opened, and she walked in. Isla Rivera, no longer Isabella, no longer the broken woman he left in a jungle, but a queen carved from survival. She wore a simple cream coat, no jewelry, no entourage, no makeup. She didn't need any of it. Her presence filled the room. Dominic stood, but she didn't offer a greeting. She simply sat across from him, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly, voice hoarse. She said nothing. "I've had time to think," he continued, "about what I did, about you. I was a different man back then. Greedy, cold. But I've changed. Prison changes people. I see what I did now. I wish I could undo it." Isla leaned back slightly, her gaze fixed and calm. "You don't get to rewrite history just because you regret the ending." Dominic swallowed. "I'm sorry, Isabella." She flinched slightly at the name, then nodded. "You gave me a curse," she said slowly, every word deliberate. "But I turned it into a crown. You thought leaving me to die would end my story. But it began a new one. One you'll never be part of." He looked down, ashamed, struggling for words. "I know I lost everything." "No," Isla said, rising to her feet. "You lost everything the day you tried to bury me. Your empire, your future, your legacy. It all began to rot the moment you thought I was disposable." He stood too, desperate. "Is there any way, any chance at redemption?" She stepped toward the exit. "Not from me." And then the door opened, and there he was, Leo, standing just outside with a book tucked under one arm and a calm look in his eyes. He was tall for his age, proud, and very clearly her son. Dominic's breath caught. "Is that?" "Yes," Isla said without looking back. "The one thing you'll never own. The only thing you truly lost." She walked out, hand in hand with her son, leaving Dominic behind, haunted by the child he never held and the woman he could never destroy. The world knew her name now, not as a socialite or a victim, but as a force of nature. Isla Rivera had become more than a wellness mogul. She was a movement. Her story had inspired millions, but she didn't stop at inspiration. She turned her pain into purpose. Months after Dominic's sentencing, Isla launched the Thrive Foundation, a global initiative dedicated to helping abandoned women and children reclaim their lives. With Terrasol's massive reach, the foundation quickly established shelters, education centers, and trauma recovery clinics in places the world had long ignored. She personally oversaw the construction of a new school and a maternal health center near the jungle village that had saved her, a gift to the tribe that gave her back her life. She named the campus Myra's Garden, in honor of the healer who had pulled her from death's edge. Every wall was painted with bright vines and stories, murals of strength and survival. Women from around the world came to learn, to heal, and to grow. But perhaps the boldest chapter in Isla's journey came when she did the unthinkable. She bought Blackwell Biotech. Piece by piece, she acquired the remnants of Dominic's crumbled empire. And then, with the precision of a woman reclaiming stolen ground, she dismantled it. The name was erased, the toxic leadership removed, and the structure reborn under Terrasol. No longer a symbol of greed and power, the company now focused on sustainable health, ethical medicine, and accessible care. She called the new branch Terra Justice. In the evenings, Isla returned to her home on a cliffside estate overlooking the ocean, surrounded by lush gardens of healing herbs, many from the jungle that had once threatened her life. Her favorite space was a small greenhouse where Leo often played, his fingers gently tracing the edges of leaves she had once used to treat wounds and birth pain. He had grown into a curious, empathetic child. A boy who understood that his mother wasn't just powerful, she was rooted. One afternoon, as the golden sun spilled across the garden, Isla knelt beside him, brushing dirt from his fingers. Leo looked up and asked, "Do plants remember who saved them?" She smiled, brushing a leaf between her fingers. No, my love. But sometimes, they grow into something strong enough to save others. And in that moment, surrounded by life, legacy, and the peace she'd earned, Isla felt it. Not victory, not vengeance, but wholeness. She was home. Finally. Entirely. Unapologetically.